The council chamber on Concordia Prime had never seen such chaos. Ambassador Zakara of the Sirathi stood at the center platform, her crystalline form pulsing with anxious energy. Around her, representatives from 200 civilizations argued in a dozen languages, their translation devices struggling to keep up with the panic. "Another system has fallen," announced the Lumini delegate, her voice crackling like breaking glass. 12 worlds consumed in 3 months. The Devourers are accelerating. Zakara closed her 3 eyes and reached out with her telepathic sense. She felt the fear radiating from every being in the chamber. For 10,000 years, the Galactic Council had maintained peace through wisdom and diplomacy. They had evolved beyond primitive warfare. Their weapons were designed to disable ships, not destroy them. Their soldiers were trained to capture, not kill. Violence was something they had left behind, like childhood fears. But the Devourers did not negotiate. They did not surrender. They simply consumed. The massive screens around the chamber displayed the latest reports. The Devourers were not biological creatures or machines in any traditional sense. They were something in between, a silicon-based hive mind that converted matter into more of itself. Planets, ships, stations, even stars eventually fell to their endless hunger. They felt no pain, knew no fear, and learned from every encounter. "Our defensive fleets are failing," said Commander Vex of the Depths Dwellers, his aquatic suit bubbling with distress. "We drove them back from the Tertian colonies, but we lost 60 ships doing it. They adapted to our tactics within hours. Our disable weapons only slow them. They repair faster than we can damage them." The chamber erupted again. Some delegates called for retreat, for evacuating entire sectors and establishing new defensive lines. Others demanded more resources for the fleet, better weapons, faster ships. A few simply sat in stunned silence, unable to process what was happening. Zakara had served the Council for 3 centuries. She had mediated wars, prevented conflicts, and helped dozens of species join the galactic community. But she had never felt this level of collective terror. Through her telepathic sense, she could feel it like a weight pressing down on her mind. Civilizations that had existed for millions of years were suddenly facing extinction. She thought about the reports locked away in the Council archives. Reports about a species discovered 50 years ago in a remote arm of the galaxy. A species from a death world, a planet so hostile that everything on it had evolved to fight and survive. The Galactic Council had observed them from a distance, horrified by what they saw. Humans. The word itself had become something whispered in dark corners. They were primitives who still practiced warfare on a massive scale. They had weapons that could crack planets. They fought each other over resources, ideology, and territory. When the Council had revealed themselves, hoping to guide humanity toward peace, the humans had nearly fired on the contact ships. The Council had voted to quarantine the Sol system, to wait until humanity evolved beyond their violent nature. But Zakara had read every report about them. She had watched their broadcasts and studied their history. Humans were violent, yes, but they were also fiercely protective. They formed bonds across genetic lines, adopting even other species into their families. They had a concept called sacrifice, where individuals would die to save others, even strangers. They cried for people they had never met. They created art about tragedy and loss. Most importantly, they knew how to fight wars and win them. "We need to consider alternatives," Zakara said, her voice cutting through the chaos. The chamber slowly quieted. "We have exhausted our traditional methods. The Devourers are unlike any threat we have faced. What are you suggesting?" asked the Lumini delegate. Zakara's form dimmed slightly, a sign of shame among her people. "There is a species we quarantined. A Deathworld species with advanced technology and extensive knowledge of warfare." The chamber exploded with protests. Several delegates stood, their voices rising in anger and fear. "The humans?" Commander Vex's suit turned a dark red. "You cannot be serious. They are barbarians. We isolated them because they are dangerous. And we are dying," Zakara replied calmly. "We face an enemy that our philosophy cannot defeat. We need someone who understands destruction." "They could be worse than the Devourers," another delegate shouted. "Once we invite them in, who will stop them?" Zakara touched her chest in the Sirathi gesture of sincerity. "I have studied them extensively. Yes, they are violent. Yes, they wage war. But they also stop. They have rules even in combat. They rebuild what they destroy. They are capable of terrible things, but they choose mercy more often than we give them credit for. The debate raged for hours. Some delegates threatened to withdraw their worlds from the Council rather than work with humans. Others argued that desperate times required desperate measures. The Lumini delegate pointed out that they had no other options. Their weapons were useless and their tactics were failing. Finally, the vote was called. It was close, far closer than any major council decision in recorded history. But desperation won. The council authorized contact with humanity. Shakara personally composed the message. She kept it simple because she knew humans valued directness. The message drone was loaded and sent through the quantum relay network, bypassing the quarantine barriers. It would reach Earth in 3 days. As the chamber emptied, Shakara stood alone at the viewing platform looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Devourers were consuming another world, and somewhere else humanity would soon receive a message from a galaxy that had shunned them. She wondered if they would even answer. If they did, would they come to save the galaxy or conquer it? She had argued passionately for this decision, but now, in the quiet dark, she felt afraid. The galaxy had spent 10,000 years building a civilization without war. Now they were inviting warriors to save them. She just hoped they could control what they were unleashing. The message was simple. We are dying. Will you help? Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the United Nations Space Command briefing room, watching the alien message play for the 5th time. The holographic display showed Ambassador Jakara's translated words, along with images of destroyed worlds and desperate alien refugees. The room was packed with military officials, government representatives, and scientific advisors, all watching in tense silence. We are dying. Will you help? The message ended and the room erupted into debate. Sarah raised her hand for silence. At 62 years old, she was one of the most decorated officers in human history. She had fought in the Mars Rebellion, commanded the defense of the Europa colonies, and lost more friends than she cared to count. Her gray hair was cut short and her dark eyes held the weight of decades of command decisions. They have some nerve, General Martinez said from across the table. 50 years ago, they put a barrier around our system, told us we were too violent, too primitive. They treated us like animals in a zoo. Now they want our help. They are desperate, said Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the chief xenobiologist. From the data they sent, this devourer threat has destroyed 12 systems in 3 months. Their casualty numbers are catastrophic. Not our problem, another official said. Let them figure it out. Sarah had expected this reaction. Humanity had not forgotten the isolation. For 50 years, they had been cut off from galactic trade, technology, and contact. Earth had continued advancing on its own, pouring resources into space exploration and military development. The quarantine had hurt, both economically and emotionally. Humans had reached the stars only to be told they were not welcome. But Sarah had also read the full intelligence reports. The Devourers were not just a threat to the Galactic Council. If they consumed the galaxy, eventually they would reach human space. Earth had perhaps 20 years before that happened. Maybe less. Permission to speak freely? Sarah asked. The UN Secretary General nodded. They kept us isolated like animals in a zoo. Sarah began, her voice steady. They judged us for our history, for our conflicts, for our weapons. They looked at us and saw barbarians. But they are not asking us to be friends. They are not asking us to join their council or adopt their philosophy. They are asking us to do what we do best. She paused, letting her words sink in. They are asking us to fight. And if we do not, in 20 years we will be fighting the Devourers alone with no allies and no intelligence about the enemy. This is not charity. This is survival. The debate continued for 3 more hours. Some argued for neutrality, others for conditional assistance. A few wanted to use this opportunity to negotiate for technology or territory, but eventually the reality became clear. Humanity had a chance to prove themselves on the galactic stage and secure their future at the same time. The vote was unanimous. Humanity would answer the call. The mobilization was unlike anything Earth had seen since the world wars of the 20th century. Every military base activated. Reserves were called up. Shipyards went to 24-hour production schedules. Within a week, the scale of human preparation shocked even the most optimistic planners. Sarah walked through the orbital shipyard above Earth, inspecting the fleet that was assembling. 12 carrier groups, each built around massive dreadnought-class ships bristling with railguns, missile pods, and kinetic weapons. These were not the elegant vessels the aliens flew. Human ships were brutal and utilitarian, designed for one purpose: winning wars. "Admiral," said Captain Williams, her aide, "the Galactic observers are requesting another meeting. They seem concerned about our weapons loadout." Sarah almost smiled. "Let me guess. They saw the nuclear torpedoes? And the chemical weapons reserves, the kinetic kill vehicles, the biological warfare contingencies?" Williams paused. "Ma'am, they are genuinely frightened of us." "Good," Sarah said quietly. "Fear is honest. Better than pity." The day before departure, Ambassador Zakara arrived on the flagship, the UNSC Indomitable. Sarah met her in the conference room. The alien's crystalline form pulsed with soft blue light, and Sarah felt a strange tingling at the back of her mind. The Sirathi's telepathic presence. "Please do not read my thoughts without permission," Sarah said firmly. Zakara's light dimmed, and what Sarah had learned was an apology. "Forgive me. Your species radiates emotion strongly. It is difficult to block out." They sat across from each other, human and alien, warrior and diplomat. "Are your people eager for glory?" Zakara asked. "No," Sarah replied. "We are eager to protect. Glory is what people who have never fought wars think war is about. My people know better. Then why do they smile? Why do I sense anticipation?" Sarah considered her answer carefully. "Because for 50 years we have been told we are not good enough for the galaxy. We have been isolated and judged. Now we have a chance to prove that our strengths, even our violence, have value. We are not eager to kill. We are eager to save." Zakara was silent for a long moment. Through her telepathic sense, she felt the complex swirl of emotions in Sarah's mind. Pride, determination, sadness, and underneath it all, a fierce protective instinct. Humans were dangerous, yes, but they directed that danger outward toward threats. The fleet departed 3 days later. As 12 carrier groups jumped into galactic space, alien observers recorded everything. The ships moved in precise formation, their tactical systems already running combat scenarios. On every vessel, human crews checked weapons, reviewed enemy data, and prepared for war. On the refugee station at the edge of Council space, Lieutenant Marcus Webb stood guard duty. He was 26, tall and broad-shouldered, with kind eyes that had not yet seen real combat. Around him, alien refugees huddled in groups, whispering and pointing at the human soldiers. A small Lumini child approached him. Her crystalline body was cracked in several places, injuries from a devourer attack. She looked up at him with what Webb guessed was curiosity. "Are you the monsters they warned us about?" she asked in broken English. Webb knelt down to her level. Behind him, he heard his sergeant chuckle. He looked at the child, at her scared eyes and broken form, and felt something shift inside him. "We are your monsters now, kid," he said gently, "and we are going to keep you safe." The Tertian system was dying. Admiral Sarah Chen watched the tactical display as her fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel. The fourth planet was half consumed, its surface covered in the gray metallic growth of the devourers. Orbital stations were being stripped for materials. The Galactic Defense Fleet was in full retreat, their elegant ships firing uselessly at the enemy swarm. "Ma'am, the Galactic Commander is hailing us," Captain Williams reported. "He is requesting we fall back to the secondary defensive line." Sarah studied the display. 3,000 devourer ships surrounded the planet, with more emerging from the surface every minute. The silicon creatures converted matter into themselves, growing exponentially. If they finished consuming Tertian 4, they would move to the next planet, then the next. "Negative," Sarah replied. "Signal all ships. We are going in." The bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency. Sarah felt the familiar weight of command settle on her shoulders. This was what humanity had trained for, what they had perfected over centuries of conflict. Not glory, not conquest, just the brutal mathematics of warfare. "Open a channel to all allied forces," she ordered. "All weapons free. Show them what a death world breeds." The human fleet accelerated toward the enemy. Railgun batteries powered up, nuclear torpedoes armed themselves, and kinetic kill vehicles calculated firing solutions. The aliens on the tactical network went silent, and Sarah knew they were horrified by what they were seeing. Human weapons were not designed to disable, they were designed to destroy. First wave, launch. Missiles streaked across the dark, hundreds of them, each carrying a small nuclear warhead. The devourers tried to adapt, firing defensive systems they had copied from galactic ships. But human missiles did not fly in predictable patterns. They juked, weaved, and coordinated. overwhelming the enemy point defense through sheer aggression. Explosions bloomed across the Devourer formation. The Silicon ships cracked and shattered, unable to repair themselves fast enough. Sarah watched with cold satisfaction as the first enemy vessels simply ceased to exist. Second wave kinetic bombardment. Railguns fired, launching magnetically accelerated slugs at incredible velocity. No explosives, no complex systems, just metal moving at a significant fraction of light speed. When they hit like the fist of an angry god. Devourer ships disintegrated into expanding clouds of debris. The enemy adapted quickly as expected. They began forming defensive clusters, using destroyed ships as shields. They changed their hull composition to better absorb kinetic impacts. But Sarah had expected this too. All ships boarding assault. Marines, you are go. Lieutenant Marcus Webb stood in the drop pod bay of the UNSC Valiant, checking his weapons for the third time. Around him, 50 Marines prepared in similar fashion. They wore heavy armor, carried assault rifles loaded with depleted uranium rounds, and each had enough explosives strapped to their gear to level a small building. "Listen up," shouted Sergeant Rodriguez. "The Devourers are not like anything you trained against. They do not feel pain. They do not retreat. They learn fast. But they have never fought humans in close quarters. Remember your training. Watch your corners. And if things get bad, remember you have grenades for a reason." The pod launched, slamming Webb back into his seat. Through the small viewport, he watched as dozens of other pods streaked toward a massive Devourer processing ship. Point defense fire lit up the space around them, but the human pods were armored heavily. Most made it through. Impact. The pod's nose drill activated, boring through the silicon hull. The doors blew open and Webb rushed forward with his squad. The interior of the Devourer ship was like nothing in any training simulation. The walls were alive, pulsing with metallic growth. The air was thick with silicon dust that clogged their filters. And everywhere Devourers moved, their bodies constantly shifting and adapting. Webb's rifle barked, depleted uranium rounds tearing through silicon flesh. The creatures fell but immediately began repairing themselves. His squad moved in practiced formation, clearing corridors and planting explosives at structural weak points. A Devourer dropped from the ceiling, its limbs extending like spears. Webb dodged barely, and his combat knife found its core processor. The creature collapsed, but 2 more appeared behind it. "Grenades out," Rodriguez shouted. The corridor exploded. Webb's armor protected him from the blast, but his ears rang. When the smoke cleared, the Devourers were down, but the walls were already growing new ones. "Fall back to extraction point," Webb ordered. "Set the charges to remote. We are not staying for the fireworks." The Marines fought their way back to the pods, leaving a trail of explosives throughout the ship. 3 Marines did not make it. Webb watched their status indicators go dark and felt something cold settle in his chest. Back on the Valiant, Sarah coordinated the larger battle. The boarding assaults had worked perfectly, planting nuclear charges deep inside enemy ships where their adaptive armor could not protect them. She waited until all pods were clear, then gave the order. "Detonate." The Devourer fleet lit up like a string of firecrackers. Ships exploded from the inside, their silicon structure unable to contain the nuclear fury. The chain reaction spread, ship to ship, as debris struck nearby vessels at high velocity. When the light faded, a third of the Devourer force was gone. The rest began to retreat, falling back toward the planet's surface to regenerate. "Do not let them recover," Sarah ordered. "All ships prepare for nuclear bombardment of the planet's surface." "Ma'am," Captain Williams said quietly. "The galactic observers are objecting. They say bombing the planet is barbaric." Sarah turned to look at him. "Tell them they are welcome to go down there and fight the Devourers hand to hand. Otherwise, this is how wars are won." The nuclear torpedoes fell like rain. Sarah watched as the planet's surface lit up with atomic fire. The Devourers could not adapt fast enough. Their processing centers melted. Their growth structures collapsed. Within an hour, the planet was sterile, but it was no longer a Devourer factory. The battle was over. Sarah reviewed the casualty reports with a heavy heart. 23 ships damaged, 9 destroyed, 4,000 dead. The Galactic fleet, which had stayed back, lost only 200 because human ships had drawn all enemy fire. In the medical bay, Lieutenant Webb sat beside a wounded Marine from another squad. The young woman had lost her left arm below the elbow, torn off by a Devourer blade. "Did we win, sir?" she asked, her voice weak from pain medication. "We won," Webb confirmed. Tertian system is secure. Worth it then, she said and smiled before passing out. Webb looked down at his hands. They were still shaking. He had killed today, probably dozens of times. He had watched friends die, and he would have to do it all again tomorrow. On the command deck, Ambassador Jakara stood beside Sarah, her telepathic sense overwhelming her with the emotions radiating from the human crew. Grief for the fallen, pride in victory, determination to continue, and underneath it all a grim acceptance of the cost. You call this acceptable losses? Jakara asked quietly. No, Sarah replied. There is nothing acceptable about losses, but there is something necessary. We did not start this war. We did not want it. But now that we are in it, we will do whatever is required to win. That is what you asked for when you called us. Jakara felt a dying human pilot's consciousness flicker across her telepathic sense. In his last moments, she felt his thoughts. Relief that his sacrifice saved the Tertian colonies. Hope that his daughter would grow up safe and peace knowing he had made a difference. She finally understood what humans meant by acceptable losses. Not that the deaths did not matter, but that they mattered enough to be worth the price. 3 months after the Battle of Tertian, the war had changed. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the War College on Concordia Prime, addressing an audience she never thought she would see. 200 alien military commanders, many from species that had not fought a war in thousands of years, sat before her learning the art of combat. Combined arms doctrine, Sarah explained, pointing to the tactical display. You cannot rely on a single weapon system or tactic. Your ships, your infantry, your support elements must work together. The enemy adapts. You must adapt faster. The Lumini commander raised her crystalline hand. But this requires accepting that some units will be sacrificed. How do we choose who lives and who dies? Sarah paused. This was the question that always came up. The aliens had advanced technology and brilliant minds, but they had evolved beyond the brutal calculus of warfare. You do not choose who dies, Sarah said carefully. You calculate risks and make the decision that saves the most lives overall. Sometimes that means losing a squad to save a battalion. Sometimes it means sacrificing a ship to save a fleet. It is not about choosing death. It is about choosing which lives you can save. The room was silent. Sarah could see the struggle on their faces. These peaceful species learning to think like warriors. She felt like she was corrupting them, teaching children to fight. But the Devourers gave them no choice. Over the past months, humanity had launched a coordinated counteroffensive across 6 systems. They taught the galactic races everything they knew. The Lumini learned to weaponize their crystalline resonance, creating sonic weapons that could shatter Devourer hulls. The Depths Dwellers developed acoustic minds that confused enemy sensors. The Sirathi used their telepathy to coordinate attacks across vast distances. Under human instruction, the galactic forces were becoming warriors. And they were winning. But the Devourers were learning too. Captain Marcus Webb, now leading a joint human-alien special forces unit, received the distress call while his team was returning from a successful raid. The Kepler Nexus, a major industrial hub, was under attack. An entire human battle group was engaged. Change course, Webb ordered. Full speed to Kepler. His crew included humans, Lumini, and even 2 Sirathi telepaths. Over the months, they had learned to work together, combining human aggression with alien capabilities. They trusted each other with their lives. They arrived to find hell. The Devourer fleet had done something new. Instead of their usual swarm tactics, they fought in coordinated formations. They predicted human attack patterns, countered human strategies, and adapted to human weapons faster than ever before. They are fighting like us, whispered Lieutenant Yuki Tanaka, Webb's second-in-command. Webb watched in horror as human ships fell one by one. The Devourers were using human tactics against humans. They feinted, flanked, and executed complex maneuvers. They even attempted boarding actions, something they had never done before. Get me Admiral Chen, Webb said urgently. Sarah received Webb's report while coordinating the defense of 3 different systems. She reviewed the tactical data from Kepler Nexus with growing dread. The Devourers had incorporated destroyed human ships into their biomass. They had not just salvaged technology. They had absorbed strategic knowledge, combat doctrine, and tactical thinking. Humanity's greatest strength had become a weapon against them. The Devourers now understood human warfare. They knew how humans thought, how they planned, and how they fought. Every victory humanity achieved taught the enemy more. "Ma'am, we need new orders," Captain Williams said quietly. "Our current tactics are not working." Sarah stared at the star map, at the red markers showing Devourer positions and the blue markers showing Allied forces. She had spent 3 months teaching aliens how to fight wars. Now she needed to teach them something far worse. "Recall all fleet commanders," she said, her voice heavy. "We need to change everything." The emergency council meeting on Concordia Prime was tense. Sarah stood before the galactic leaders, many of whom looked at her with increasing fear. "The Devourers have learned our patterns," Sarah explained. "They know how we fight because we fight with honor, with rules, with predictable strategies. To defeat them now, we must abandon those rules, and what do you mean?" asked Commander Vex. Sarah took a deep breath. "Total war. No conventions, no limits, no predictability. We must be willing to use every weapon, every tactic, including those we consider immoral. We must become unpredictable even to ourselves." The chamber erupted. Delegates stood, shouting accusations. She was asking them to become the monsters they feared, to abandon the principles that had guided galactic civilization for millennia. Ambassador Jakara's telepathic voice cut through the chaos, speaking directly into Sarah's mind. "Is this what humanity truly is? Monsters without limits?" Sarah met the alien's gaze. "No. We are monsters who choose to have limits. But when survival is at stake, we can choose to remove them. The difference between us and the Devourers is that we can stop. We can choose to be civilized again after the war. Can you trust us to make that choice?" The vote was split. Half the council wanted to continue with modified tactics. The other half wanted to replace Sarah with a less aggressive commander. In the end, desperation won again, but barely. Sarah kept her command, but she knew she was on borrowed time. Dr. Amara Okonkwo, a human xenobiologist, had been working with Sarathi telepaths for months, studying Devourer psychology. She burst into Sarah's office 3 days after the council meeting. "We found it," Amara said breathlessly. "The Devourer's central hive network. It is in the Maelstrom Nebula." Sarah studied the data. The nebula was a massive cloud of ionized gas and stellar debris, considered uninhabitable by all known species. But the Devourers were not like any known species. "If we destroy the hive network, the entire species collapses?" Sarah asked. "Theoretically," Amara confirmed. "But the nebula is huge. Finding the exact location could take years." "We do not have years." Sarah began planning the most dangerous operation of the war. A strike force would penetrate the Maelstrom Nebula, locate the hive network, and destroy it using Earth's prototype antimatter warheads. The weapons were experimental, barely tested, and incredibly unstable. Captain Webb volunteered his unit immediately. "Someone needs to scout ahead," he said. "My team can handle it." Sarah wanted to refuse, but she knew he was right. Webb's mixed unit had proven themselves time and again. If anyone could navigate the nebula and survive long enough to mark the target, it was them. As Webb's ship prepared to depart, Sarah called him to her office. "Marcus," she said, using his first name for the first time. "You understand this is likely a one-way trip?" "Yes, ma'am." "And you are still going?" Webb smiled. 3 months ago, a Lumine child asked me if I was a monster. I told her I was her monster. Time to prove it." Sarah watched him leave, feeling the weight of command press down harder than ever. She was sending people to die again, always again. She wondered if she would have anything left of her humanity when this war finally ended. Jakara found her later, standing at the observation deck, staring at the stars. "You carry their deaths with you," the Sarathi said. "I can feel it. Every life lost weighs on your mind." "That is what makes us different from the Devourers," Sarah replied. "We remember, we mourn. We carry the cost. Is that enough? Does remembering justify the killing?" Sarah turned to face her. "No, nothing justifies it. But it is necessary. And when this war is over, we will have to live with what we have done. That is our punishment and our redemption." The alert came at 0300 hours. Admiral Sarah Chen was already awake, as she had been most nights since the war began. The tactical display showed what she had feared most. The Devourers were not waiting for humanity to come to them. They had launched their own strategic strike at Earth. How? Captain Williams demanded, staring at the display. "We had scouts watching every approach vector." "They learned deception from us," Sarah said, her voice cold. "The attack on the outer colonies was a feint. Their main force has been building in dark space for weeks. They are hitting Earth while most of our fleet is across the galaxy." The numbers were brutal. 3,000 Devourer ships were approaching Earth. Humanity had perhaps 800 ships in system, plus orbital defenses and ground installations. The enemy would arrive in 36 hours. Sarah made the hardest decision of her life. She split her forces. Half would continue toward the Maelstrom Nebula to destroy the Hive network. The other half would race back to Earth. Neither force would be strong enough alone. Both operations would require miracles. "Get me Captain Webb," she ordered. Webb's face appeared on the screen. His ship was already inside the nebula, navigating through radiation storms and spatial anomalies. Behind him, his mixed human-alien crew worked their stations with focused intensity. "Admiral," Webb said, "we have located potential Hive sites. There are 3 candidates. We need time to narrow it down." "You do not have time," Sarah replied. "The Devourers are attacking Earth. In 36 hours, our homeworld could fall. You need to find that Hive and paint it for strike. We are coming in hot." Webb's expression hardened. "Understood, ma'am. We will find it." On Earth, the mobilization was total. Every ship that could fly went into orbit. Every weapon platform activated. Retired veterans were called back to service. Civilians volunteered for defense militias. The United Nations broadcast a simple message: Earth would not fall without a fight. Lieutenant Amara Singh stood on the moon base, watching the fleet assemble above Earth. She was a pilot, barely 23 years old, flying a refurbished destroyer from the Mars conflict. Her fighter squadron was the last line of defense. "Scary, isn't it?" said her wingman Carlos. "All those ships coming to kill us." "Scarier that we are all that stands between them and 7 billion people," Amara replied. The Devourer fleet arrived exactly on schedule. They dropped out of faster-than-light travel in waves surrounding Earth and its moon. The battle began immediately. Human ships charged forward with characteristic aggression. Nuclear torpedoes flew. Railguns fired. The space around Earth lit up with weapons fire and explosions. But the Devourers were ready. They had learned human tactics perfectly. They countered every strategy, predicted every move. The battle turned into a grinding meat grinder. Ships on both sides died by the dozens. Debris filled near-Earth space, making navigation hazardous. Amara's squadron flew through the chaos, picking off Devourer fighters and screening larger ships. She lost 3 wingmen in the first hour. On the moon, the Devourers attempted a landing. Human Marines, backed by alien volunteers who had chosen to stay, met them in the tunnels beneath the lunar bases. Marcus Webb's words echoed through the resistance, monsters fighting for those who could not fight themselves. Among the defenders was the Lumini child Webb had spoken to months ago. She was not a fighter, but she used her crystalline body to reflect laser fire, helping Marines hold critical corridors. She had learned courage from humans. Now she returned the favor. As Earth's defenses weakened, something unexpected happened. Alien refugees who humanity had saved during the past months refused to evacuate. Ships from a dozen species joined the defense. The Lumini, the Depths Dwellers, the Sirathi, species that had not fought wars in millennia, took up human weapons and fought beside humanity. "Why are you here?" a human soldier asked a Sirathi telepath on a disabled orbital platform. "Because you came when we called," the alien replied. "Because you bled for us. We will not abandon you now." Meanwhile, in the Maelstrom Nebula, Captain Webb pushed his ship to its limits. The radiation was killing them slowly, even through shielding. His Sirathi crew members used their telepathy to guide them through the worst of the spatial distortions. The Lumini engineer kept the engines running through sheer determination. "Found it," Lieutenant Tanaka shouted. "Massive biosignature dead ahead. That is the Hive core." Webb stared at the display. The Hive network was enormous, a structure the size of a small moon pulsing with silicon life. Around it, thousands of Devourer ships stood guard. "Paint the target," Webb ordered. "Broadcast the coordinates on all channels. Admiral Chen needs to know where to shoot." "Sir, we are getting hull breaches." "The radiation is too intense." "I know," Webb said calmly. "Keep transmitting. As long as the signal gets through, we have done our job." Sarah's strike force arrived at the nebula edge to find Webb's ship barely functional, still broadcasting the target coordinates. The Devourer defense fleet moved to intercept. "All ships," Sarah ordered. "Everything we have. Clear a path to that Hive." The battle in the nebula was unlike anything Sarah had commanded. The ionized gas conducted energy weapons unpredictably. Sensors were unreliable. Navigation was by guess and instinct. But human ships pressed forward. accepting catastrophic losses to push through. Sarah personally piloted a bomber loaded with an antimatter warhead. Around her, ships died, creating the opening she needed. She thought about Earth, about the people fighting there, about every life depending on this moment. "Admiral, you have a clear run," Williams reported from a dying cruiser. "Go now." Sarah pushed the bomber to maximum speed, streaking toward the hive core. Devourer fighters pursued, but her escort ships sacrificed themselves to draw them off. She thought about Marcus Webb, still transmitting from his failing ship. She thought about the Lumini child fighting on the moon. She thought about every being, human and alien, who had trusted her to end this war. The antimatter warhead armed itself. Sarah set the timer and ejected, except there was no ejection pod. The bomber had been stripped down to carry the massive weapon. She had known this would be one way. "Tell them," Sarah said into the comm, hoping someone could hear through the interference. "Tell them it was worth it." She manually piloted the bomber into the hive core and detonated. The explosion tore through the Maelstrom Nebula like the birth of a new star. The antimatter reaction consumed the hive network, and with it the central consciousness of the Devourers. Across the galaxy, every Devourer ship, every growth structure, every silicon organism simply stopped. Without the hive mind, they were nothing but lifeless matter. At Earth, the attacking fleet went dark mid-battle. Human and alien defenders watched in stunned silence as enemy ships drifted dead in space. Amara Singh pulled her fighter alongside a Devourer vessel and saw no movement, no life, just inert metal. "We won," someone whispered over the comm. "We actually won." The celebration was muted. Earth's orbit was a graveyard. 40% of the defensive fleet destroyed. Casualties in the millions. The moon base was heavily damaged. Victory had cost everything. 6 months later, a memorial was dedicated on Concordia Prime. Thousands of names covered its walls, human and alien alike. At the center was Admiral Sarah Chen's name, along with every member of her final strike force. General Marcus Webb, promoted after surviving the Maelstrom mission, stood before the memorial with Ambassador Jakara. His unit had been recovered after the battle, barely alive but intact. "Do you regret calling us?" Webb asked quietly. Chikara's crystalline form pulsed thoughtfully. "We unleashed something terrible. Humanity taught the galaxy to wage war again. Some fear what that means for the future. And you?" "I think we learned something more important than warfare," Chikara replied. "We learned sacrifice. We learned that monsters who choose mercy are the truest heroes. Admiral Chen could have evacuated. You could have stopped transmitting and saved your crew. But you did not. You chose to protect others at the cost of yourself. That is not monstrous. That is what we should have always been." The Galactic Council voted unanimously to grant humanity full membership with no restrictions. Human ships now patrolled alongside alien vessels in a new integrated defense force. General Webb trained the first class of joint military officers, teaching them not just how to fight but when to stop. On Earth, in a park restored after the battle, a human child and a Lumini child played together. Nearby, human and alien parents watched, knowing their children would inherit a galaxy that understood both peace and the price of maintaining it. Webb watched them and smiled. Humanity had answered the call. They had proven their worth. They had become the galaxy's warriors, its protectors, its monsters who chose to be heroes. And when the next threat came, whenever that might be, the galaxy would be ready. Not because they had learned to fight, but because they had learned what was worth fighting for.